Okay, let's open in a word of prayer. Okay, let's open a word of prayer. Lord, thanks for this day. Pray that you bless our time together today and that we'll be able to get through this material in a coherent fashion and bless our time together. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I have a lot of stuff today. So I'm going to be doing a number of interviews this week. I'll post those on my Facebook page, Twitter, or Telegram. Most of the stuff I post on Facebook, but I do things occasionally on Twitter, Getter, True Social, and Telegram. But I'm not prolific, let's put it that way. And now what happened? My thing didn't show up. Oh, there it is. So today we're going to talk about massive, humongous change. And I have about 80 video clips and everything that I want to go over. I don't think we're going to get through them. I do think, as I was listening to a number of secular news sources, commentary, that sort of thing, everybody's talking about convergence, everything happening at once, that it's happening very, very fast. And then the logistics things does come into play a lot. And then understanding. And so I would just encourage people to be a little bit humble about your view, that I think we're in a discussion stage. We're going to have some back and forth that, believe me, the world has changed in 5 weeks. Can we agree on that? And I don't think that there's no walking it back. So again, we remind you of this verse in Daniel about the fact that in the end times, and I don't think this is like limited to the 70th week, as we get closer and closer to the second coming of Christ, people are going to have a better understanding about how things are going to work out. But I see a lot of very dogmatic, well, if you don't see it my way, I'm never going to recommend anything that you ever do, or that type of thing, because the world has changed dramatically. I mean, go back 3 years, go back 4 years, nobody really called this where we're at right now. Nobody called this thing that's going on in Gaza 8 weeks ago. Remember, Netanyahu went to the UN, stood there in the well of the UN and said the Middle East is going to change for the better. It's going to be a blessing. Even Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, said in an interview with Fox News, Brett Baer, that week, that this was going to be the most historic peace agreement that's since the end of the World War II. Now all of that stuff is off. Now, I don't think it's dead. I think that it can come back. And so some of this stuff is going to be a little bit out of order just because there was just such a lot of it's pretty good. But I just have some strays that I'm going to do here at the beginning and interspersed. But this is from the Financial Times the other day, an opinion piece that says, America is discovering the limits of its leverage on Israel. Now, there's a lot of controversy. There's people out there that will tell you, by the way, I have to say this up front. You have to be careful about the sources that you listen to. You are seeing Jew hatred on a scale not seen since the 1930s. It's unbelievable. And a lot of it is coming from people who claim to be Christians. And it's very easy to identify those channels. I talked about some of them in a midweek that I did on Thursday. And there are others. There are plenty of them. And there are people that we may agree with them on things that they might have to say about Charlie Vector or something like that. But they've come out rabidly against anything Israel, anything Jewish. And it is all of the anti-Semitic tropes that we've seen over the centuries. And it's not limited to Arabs. It's very often Christians. And it sickens me a lot when I see it. And I speak out against it. So I want it to be clear, while I am a supporter of Israel, I don't think Israel is perfect. I don't think the United States is perfect. By the way, this week in Ohio, we're going to have an election. I think this election is a bellwether on how things might go in 2024. And we have an issue too, which is marijuana legalization or something to do with marijuana. That's issue 2, but issue 1, and I think as a thinking Christian, you have to vote against this issue 1, which will allow, the terms are not defined very well, and it's to allow unrestricted abortion. I mean, there's just no other, and the way that it's going to go may be similar to a similar provision was enacted up in Michigan. Now they're almost giving carte blanche to doctors who perform abortions that they can do it at any time that they want. And I mean any time. And I'm not so sure that you're not going to see that some courts are going to step in with the ambiguous language and say, well, if it's a very unhealthy child, after birth is okay. I can see that. And I also think that it talks about sexual reproductive services, and the concern of a lot of people that oppose issue 1 in Ohio is that might be used to push the transgender agenda because that deals with reproductive organs. But my fear is, at least the polling that I've seen, is that issue 1 may be adopted. And that's a bellwether, I think, for how the presidential election may go in the fall of 2024. And I think some Republicans are trying to get out ahead of it. You know the name of a big one who might be running for president, depending on how all of these court cases go, who's sort of softened his stance on abortion. And part of the reason I think that he's doing that is because it's a way to get the political issue out of the hands of the opposing party, the Democrats. That's my take on it. You may not agree with me, but he said what he said. And that's concerning. So I just want you to be aware of that. So people are trying to get it out of the political realm, but I just don't know that it's going to happen. So we've seen Kansas, Michigan, states that you might have expected not to adopt provisions like that have adopted provisions similar to what's on the ballot on issue 1. So go vote. Well, go vote the right way is how I would encourage you to vote. It's a very big issue. And these issues are coming up all over the place. But this is what I said would happen. When Roe versus Wade was overturned, it didn't ban abortion. It overturned a couple of cases that had led to essentially unrestricted abortion in many cases, in many circuits in the federal system. I said at the time that if this thing abortion was going to continue to be limited or going to be limited, it had to be done on a state-by-state, locality-by-locality basis. That's exactly what's happened. But the opposition is very motivated, and they seem to be carrying the day. So American limits on leverage on Israel. I've seen things that America has given $8 trillion to Israel since its inception. Right now, there's a memorandum of understanding that was signed in 2016 under the Obama administration, and it'll last for 10 years. And under that, there's a provision that about $3.5 billion per year is given to Israel. And it's more than is given to, I think, any other country. Well, any other country other than Ukraine, which is getting like 30 or 40 times that amount over the past year and a half. But that's over 10 years. And a lot of times it's not so much that we're giving them $3.5 billion that they can put in their pocket and do what they want. There are severe restrictions on it. And part of it is there's believed to be a synergy that in weapons development, we will help each other out. But then they will buy weapons from us with the money that we give them. So it's not just a straight out transfer, despite what some of the lunatics want to tell you that are out there. But America's discovering that, listen, Israel's going to act in what it views its own best interest. Right now, its own best interest is that we're going to take out Hamas. We're going to remove Hamas from being a viable entity of any kind going forward. That's a very difficult fight. There was a good interview. I'll play a little bit of it later in my update today between Barry Weiss. Look, she's a center to center left person. She lives with a woman. They have a child, but she's smart. I mean, she's a smart, intelligent thinker. She's Jewish ethnically. I don't know how religious she is as a Jew, but she's a good thinker. And she has a podcast called Honestly Speaking. I think that's what it's called. Let me just check here. I want to make sure I get it right. And she does some good. Oh, Honestly, with Barry Weiss, Bariwiss. And she was fired or quit the New York Times because she just couldn't take what was going on. And really what she viewed as the Jew hatred going on there. But she had an interview with Walter Russell Mead, who's a great historian, and I don't agree with him. I mean, in the interview, he praises the opposition presidential candidate to President Trump from 2016. He said she had it right on a couple of occasions. So, but listen to what he says. And what he said was, with the way things are going in Gaza right now, we need to understand that war is not a war crime. War is not a war crime. I thought it was a very profound quote. I actually pulled it out and put it on my Facebook page. Because war is not pretty. You cannot have a war where innocent people are not killed. And the question is, what is Israel supposed to do? What is anyone supposed to do? What is any country supposed to do when this war comes to its neighborhoods? It's a possibility. I saw a podcast this morning. The person was relating some information. I won't go into it, but that there are legitimate threats in a number of large cities. And the ones closest to us would be Detroit and Cleveland. That there could be attacks in those cities. And there were a couple dozen cities across the United States. I don't want to go into it because certain platforms don't particularly like you talking about these things. But this is coming. Look how many people have been let into the United States. I don't even have any videos of it. Go watch the videos Ben Bergwam and Michael Yan and others are putting up about what's going on at our border. For example, Texas put up coiled razor wire on fences to keep people from coming across the border. And what did you see happen? The federal government, the Border Patrol people went out and cut open places where people could come across the border. There are millions. It's way above 10 million people. We're not vetting these people. Do you think the operation that took place in Gaza, and we can argue about why did Israel miss it, but I want people to understand this was a very clever, sophisticated attack. On an operational level, it was one of the most sophisticated attacks ever done in military history. And we need to give the enemy some credit for crying out loud. They deceived people, and they did it. Now, listen, there's plenty of stuff, and I'm hearing a lot that went wrong on the other side. But now my suspicion, I laid awake 2 nights thinking about this. And in my mind, I was sort of writing the report that will be done in an investigation. And I think I have about a quarter to half of it done in my head. So if the Israeli government wants to hire me, I'm willing to come over and and finish it up. But my suspicion is, for example, a friend sent me a video of an attack. They were videoing the attack that happened on a base down around Gaza. And the soldiers were like, and it was like, the comment that my friend made was, it's like they knew where everybody was. And there were over 300 soldiers, my understanding is, killed in the initial stages of the attack. Now, I don't know what percentage of that, what percentage of soldiers that would be stationed down there. They have about 8 bases, but some of those bases I doubt have more than 50 people. So it could have been a very significant percentage of the number of people that were there that were killed. Then everybody said, well, why didn't the IDF respond? It may have been because they were dead. The other thing going on at the time, and look, I'm not trying to make excuses. I'm trying to evaluate this objectively. Sometimes, I've mentioned this before, when you're a young lawyer, you're given a bunch of facts, and the mistake that you can make is you can reach your conclusion and then interpret every little fact that you see as supporting your conclusion. And we have a word that we call those people in litigation. They're called losers. Because they make mistakes, they lose their objectivity. So it's very hard to be objective. But the other thing that happened too was this was the most massive rocket barrage that they've ever had. So I don't know how many soldiers were down there. I've asked the question, I haven't gotten any answers. I've also asked the question, what is the IDF's policy when you're in the rocket fire range? And this was unprecedented rocket fire, that they had more rockets launched. So did the soldiers go and take cover? Or do they run around while the rockets are flying? I don't know the answer to that, I'll be honest with you. I suspect that they're probably going to be taking cover. When there was a big attack on a U.S. base a couple of years ago, 60 Minutes did a pretty good story on it. Iranian or Iraqi drones attacked our base, or a lot of soldiers have PTSD because of the barrage that they endured. But they were just barely able to get out of harm's way. Some of them evacuated the base because they had an advance warning that something was coming. And I don't know that there were a couple killed, but not that many. But this is happening now. We've had like 29 attacks on military bases in the Middle East, in Syria and Iraq. We can argue about whether we should have a base in Syria or Iraq. That's up for discussion. I'm more than willing to have that discussion, and I'll try to be agnostic on that particular issue. But with our border leaking people, unlike anything that I've ever said, I watched Department of Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas this week testifying in front of the Senate. I do not know how the senators that are questioning him do not walk up to him and slap him. He is the rudest, most insolent, lying person I think I've ever seen in our federal government. And that's saying something. I'm telling you, this man is evil. And he had the audacity to say, well, I'm the child of Holocaust survivors. I don't care, man. You're lying. You never answer a question. They should cut off funding for salaries at the executive level of the Homeland Security till he leaves. I mean, but Republicans don't control both houses of Congress, and I don't know that that's going to happen. And then, everybody says, well, we haven't prosecuted anybody. Yeah, we don't have anybody there to prosecute. There are people to prosecute, but there are no prosecutors there that will do the right thing. It's all political. It's all been weaponized. It's just unbelievable. But here's a story. This was out of the UK. Security service drills to simulate Hamas-style terror attacks in the UK. Now, why would they do that? Because they think that something is coming. They don't do this. Now, everybody will say, oh, they're getting ready to do it. They're planning to do it. And I'm concerned about that being the default response. It's a false flag. They plan to do it. I heard people say Netanyahu planned this, or he allowed it to happen intentionally. And maybe that's the case, okay? We're not there yet. But I am telling you, I have watched the Twitter traffic on this, and it is, and you can disagree with me and still be my friend. But as a friend learned this week, if you're going to engage me on it, you're going to get hard questions, because I think it's that serious, and I'm not just going to accept a particular narrative because it's easy. This is a very, very difficult thing, and it will require a lot of investigation. So back to my friend that said, how did they know where everybody was on the bases? Let's go back a couple of years. What was one of the big scandals in the privacy world? Israeli company, I think it was called Pegasus, I'm pretty sure that's the name, had developed software that could be surreptitiously, secretly installed on somebody's phone and would track them everywhere. And it was sold to foreign governments. For example, the sheikh, who is the head of the Dubai Emirate in the United Arab Emirates, he's sort of like the vice president of the UAE. The one who's in charge, the Sheikh of Abu Dhabi, is the president of the UAE, but the vice president, the one who heads up Dubai with all those big, huge, beautiful buildings, apartments, fake islands and everything, his daughter left. She ran away from home. He used Pegasus to track her to a private yacht in the Indian Ocean within the territorial water limits of India, and I believe with the Indian naval or security forces or special forces. She was kidnapped and brought back home. This is not necessarily a good guy. He just went through a really nasty divorce with one of his wives, and I've sort of jokingly said it was his sixth wife, and the sixth wife, you can handle five, but that sixth one is really going to take you to the cleaners. She is the half-sister of King Abdullah II of Jordan. He married her. She lives in London, and she just got $700-800 million divorce settlement from the guy. But now, if that Pegasus software gets out there, how do you control where it goes? Is it possible that Iran pirated that software? They're smart people. They are very motivated. Maybe they pirated it, created it some way, I don't know, and put it on Israeli soldiers' phones. And that would let them know where everybody was, because it was like they went right to where they were. But then maybe somebody in the Israeli services, IDF, was a traitor and told them. I don't know. We're not where we can have the answer to that yet. But there's a ton of questions like that need to be answered and asked. So I'm a little bit concerned that people just accept, well, this is somebody planned it and that's all we're going to talk about. But maybe that's not the case. And I will tell you that doing that leads to the next thing. Nasrallah in his speech, and if I ever get around to it, I'm not making very much progress here, but I will get to the Nasrallah speech. And he said, and I saw people, lunatics, Jewish, self-loathing Jewish lunatics, like left-wing crazy people like Max Blumenthal, were posting on their Twitter accounts that Hamas didn't do anything. It was Israel, Hellfire missiles, helicopter pilots, and tanks that shot and killed their people. Israel did it to themselves to justify going into Gaza. And I'm just saying is once you start down the road that it was planned, it's just one little tiny step to the one where not that they planned it, that they actually did it. And that concerns me. And I think we need to be very, very careful as Christians about going there because of the implications. And I'm telling you, I saw people who Christians love because of their stance on Charlie Vector 019er saying exactly that. And that the whole thing is Israel's fault, and they have no justification for what they're doing. This is shocking to me. And this was how one thing that happened, a soldier was rescued. Now, when the pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas press got a hold of it, was she was released by Hamas. She was not released, she was rescued by IDF special forces in a very sophisticated, well-planned operation. They went into Gaza and they got her. There's still 240 that they haven't gotten yet. And it's all propaganda. There were three, you see the three ladies in the upper left-hand corner of this article from the Times of London. They came out and said, this is all Netanyahu's fault. Netanyahu, you should resign from office so we can go home. There was a lady, she was rescued. She said, well, I was treated pretty well, but her husband's still being held. So I don't give her statement that much credibility. Remember this one gal, you saw her laying, I don't think she was naked, but she looked like she had a bikini on, laying on the back of a pickup truck, obviously a broken leg, being drugged into Gaza. There are later videos of her nude body being paraded through the streets of Gaza to cheers of crowds with children. Then they came out and said, well, she's okay. She's under care here. She's under a doctor's care. And then in the early part of the operation, they found fragments of her skull in Gaza, and it was clear that she had been beheaded. The stories that I'm hearing are just horrible. I'm not going to play any of them. I'll share them, a couple of them. There's a couple first responders. I mean, they couldn't even talk. Israel is, to its credit, I think, releasing some of the videos that were taken by the Hamas terrorists on GoPro, high-definition GoPro cameras that they had on their chest or phones. First, and then what happens? What do all the the Jew-hating left-wing crazy people say? Oh, Israel just made all those videos up. It's all computer-generated graphics. Really? You have proof of that. They were able to do all of that. I mean, doing that takes a lot of time. By the way, that's a big issue. Did you hear about the school? I don't remember where the school was. New Jersey. The girls came home from school distraught. Why were they distraught? Because a lot of the boys at school were sharing fake nude images of girls in their class, their face and head on a nude body on their phones. And the girls were upset, rightly so. The kind of sick thing, though, is that the prosecutors are like, well, we're not sure that violates any law to do that. I'm not. Really? I mean, how much of your self-respect do you have to give to get your funding from good old George, the George I'm talking about, to do his bidding, to not recognize that this is a crime? And the school's like, well, we're not sure. We maybe will suspend them. We're just not sure. So, you know what? Send them all home. Let the parents deal with it. Don't let our taxpayer money support them. That's just my opinion. So this gal, she was at that rave party, that dance party down there near Gaza. She's dead. Hamas said she was alive. She was under doctor's care. What does that tell you? They will lie about everything. It's called taqiyya. You're allowed to lie. You're allowed to deceive. Because their book says that their God is the chief of deceivers. It says that. You know, the other thing I'm thinking here as I'm talking is, if we ever needed Phil Haney around, we need Phil Haney. He's not. I can remember he was driving around country and he'd come to Columbus and say, "Hey, John, I'm coming to Columbus." So I'd go over and sit in his RV and he and I would talk for 3, 4, 5 hours. And I learned a lot about what he worked on. And I'm telling you, the man was a treasure, a solid believer in Jesus Christ. So there's this measured step. So I'm going to do some graphics about this. Here's, I mentioned this, identifying Hamas victims take a toll. Go to Avi Abelo, Aviabelou, his Rumble channel, all one word, Avi Abelo. He did an interview with Abigail Gimpel. Now, a lot of you remember Jeremy Gimpel, who spoke here. Remember, we had a special night up there at Polaris. We invited him to speak. He's a rabbi. I remember it was a snowy February night. I sat and talked to him for a few hours before he spoke. Got to meet his wife, lovely lady. She's from Cleveland. His sister-in-law, his brother's wife, has started to, she's a educator, does ADHD thing. Avi Abelo interviewed her this week. Caroline Glick also interviewed her. What she does is she's preparing bodies for burial. This is very important to Jews, that the body needs to be treated respectfully and buried quickly and completely. And she said the problem was we were getting like a bag of cinders. And we had to check around the area to make sure that a cinder did not flake off and fall to the ground, because we want to respect the person. But we were getting these little bags of people to prepare them for burial. And then you try to lay them out like there would be for a human. And I don't know how she did it. She was working many hours a day. She would go home to her husband and 6 kids, and she refused to talk about it. I don't know how she functioned. They're first responders. They're talking. We went into a place where there were little babies or toddlers. We could not tell which head went with which body. Now, what does that imply? There's one that I've seen the guy interviewed. He said Hamas came in to their home. It was a father, mother, and a baby. They killed the father, put the baby in the oven, turned it on, and while the child was screaming, they raped the mother and then shot her dead. There were others where they came in and killed the family, then sat down and ate their food that they had prepared for their Shabbat lunch or dinner. They had the table set. These are crimes and inhumanity that it is on a scale that we've not matched. But listen, what do we do when people like this are streaming across our borders? You think they're going to be nice because, well, America has, laws that we don't want to violate those laws. Do you think that that's ever going to enter into their mind? This is a big problem. And so pray for these people that have been doing this. The first responders, I woke up in the middle of the night and I laid awake. I turned on I-24 News and I laid there and I watched story after story after story of people who had come under attack, had tried to escape. One guy ran into a bomb shelter near a bus stop. There were 30 or 40 that had gone into that bomb shelter. Hamas came because he was one of the first ones. He was far away from the road. They threw grenades in, and he said only 7 people survived. It's so let's not lose sight of who did this and how evil they were. This is also a concern. This is another front. We'll talk about some of the fronts. There's the Gaza front. There's the northern front with Hezbollah and Lebanon and the Iranian proxies up there. Syria, Lebanon, Iranian proxies, mainly Hezbollah in the north, but there's also the West Bank. There have been a lot of people killed on the West Bank since October 7th. And then there's also concerns that among some Arab communities within Israel that are voting citizens, that might become a problem. So that's 4 fronts. And another one, it's the media. So let's look at this. So here is Israel, and a little map. Of course, the red area is what they call the West Bank. It's actually Judea to the south, Samaria to the north. You see the Gaza Strip over here on the left along the Mediterranean. Here's another view of Gaza. There is a maritime zone that they're not allowed to fish in. They're not allowed to fish or do anything out there. There's also gas wells out there that give gas to Gaza so they can run desalination plants and that type of thing. The border of Gaza, this red area that you see around Gaza and then down along the coast, the border fence is 62 kilometers long. That's about 40 miles. But here's the interesting thing that nobody ever tells you. There's a bridge between Macau and Hong Kong that's 55 kilometers long. It's a massive building project. So this bridge, if you add the total length, it's 62 kilometers, actually longer than that thing in China. But look at what the little factoid is over here, is that 22 kilometers of it is Egyptian. Guess who's building a stronger border than Israel's has built? Egypt. Egypt doesn't want them either. Jordan doesn't want them. So here's here's a little graphic of what the wall looks like. And understand that it was breached in about 29 locations when Hamas came across. That shouldn't have happened, but they did take out guard towers and kill the people in the guard towers with drones and RPGs and that sort of thing. Then they blasted holes in the fence, and they came through in one place with a bulldozer. But understand that the fence that keeps Hamas out also keeps Israel from going in. So they've been dismantling a lot of that fence, which was built at a cost of several $1 billion and finished a couple of years ago. Here is some areas of the attack. You see where the rocket attacks were done, and then you also see and there were closer in rocket attacks. Cedar Oak gets rocket attacks. All these kibbutzes along the border fence get rocket attacks all the time. Some made Jerusalem, Tel Aviv. From North Gaza to Tel Aviv is like 45 miles, and to Jerusalem is 50 miles. And you can see where all these places were that were attacked. This is the population breakdown. The darker red, the more dense the population. And this is an interesting fact about Gaza. It is population breakdown by age. And they compare it to Hong Kong. Hong Kong has 7 million people. It's about 3 times the size of Gaza, land-wise. I think that's right. No, it's not 3 times the size. It's 3 times the population. But look at the breakdown of age, and this will show you the demographic problem of China. They're not having children. Only 10% are 0 to 14. In Gaza, it's 40% are 0 to 14. There's kids all over the place. And what does that graphic also tell you? What's the charge leveled against Israel? They're committing genocide. Okay? If you're committing genocide, how do you have 40% of your population under the ages 0 to 14? It's perhaps the most ineffective genocide in the history of mankind. Now, don't know the exact number. It could be 8,000, 9,000 people in Gaza have been killed in the Israeli operations so far. I'm not going to dispute those numbers. If you add up all the Palestinian Arabs killed and all the wars of Israel from 1948 till now, it's a double-digit percentage, like 15% of the people. It's not even 15%. Might even not even be 10% of the people that have been killed. Arabs killing Arabs in Syria. 10 times as many in Syria since 2011, as opposed to Israel and the wars they've had since 48 till now. How many demonstrations, how many embassies have been marched on because of the atrocities and war committed in the Syrian civil war? Your lack of response indicates that the answer is there haven't been any. Because this is about the Jews. It's what it says in their holy book, and this is what it's about. So this is kind of an interesting graphic. These are hospitals and schools in Gaza. The numbers are pretty shocking, I think. For example, in Hong Kong, which has 7.4 million people, Gaza has 2.2 million. So for 7.4 million, they have 43 public hospitals in Hong Kong. Gaza has 24. Look at the schools. They have over half the schools that they have in Hong Kong, and a lot of these are UN schools. There's dense populations. The other thing that they have is they have these refugee camps. Now, these are just 5 of them. These refugee camps Egypt controlled this place until like 1973 at least, if not longer. Well, wait a minute. Egypt allowed refugee camps of Arabs. What kind of ethnic country is Egypt? Arab. So how many demonstrations in Cairo against the genocide committing Egyptian government? How many Egyptian embassies have been attacked by pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian demonstrators like over the last few days against U.S. and Israeli embassies around the world? Would it surprise you that the number is like 0? In the Middle East, Barack Obama's first trip to the Middle East, he went to 2 countries. He went to Turkey, Sunni Muslim, and he went to Al-Azhar University, June 4th, 2008, or 2009. You can go watch the video. The Al-Azhar University, the leading Sunni religious institution in the world, is where he chose to go give a speech. Now, let's talk. Do we need to talk about his orientation on these things? If I'm feeling particularly nasty, I may play a clip of him later on. So you may, and I'll do it without any warning, and you may want to flee. But so they have these. So these are some of the damage areas that the damage or destroyed buildings that Israel has done. There's a refugee camp there, a big refugee camp in the middle of Gaza City. And this is the south part of the Strip. And here's a little graphic that I put. So here's Gaza, and then New York Times did a pretty good job, so I kind of photoshopped it in. And the dark blue areas are the areas of heavy damage from Israeli bombardment. since October 7th. And you see some down here in the south part, but mostly in the north. And Israel's kind of cutting the Gaza Strip in half as part of their military operation. But here's an interesting graphic. They have a thing that they call the Gaza Metro. They're the tunnels that they built, 300 miles estimated of tunnels. And here is a map. So I'm going to overlay the tunnels on top of where the damage is. So here's what it looks like. Do you see what's been happening? Israel has been targeting the areas where the tunnels are located. It hasn't been indiscriminate. And as they said, this is a big article. This is in the Times. We find a tunnel and we blow it up. Israel's being attacked by ballistic missiles, some from Yemen. This just was reported in the Telegraph in the last 18 hours. Israel shot down a ballistic missile in space for the first time in human history, coming from Yemen. One of the missiles actually was also shot down by Saudi Arabia. That's been confirmed. That's interesting. So Israel has a lot of capability. They said, we don't want your soldiers, America. We're going to do this on our own. And this is an article also in the Times saying what is and isn't a war crime in Gaza will take years to determine. So you see all the pundits, all the pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian pundits running around, oh, this is a war crime, this is a war crime. No, Walter Russell Mead is 100% correct. War is not a war crime. Remember that. Here is... So here is, and this is the other thing, there are fake videos out there like crazy. So this was a video that was posted, or pictures of, on the right, look at the dead people. But look at what the video also showed, or the picture also showed somebody doing, it was like Lazarus raising from the dead, right there in Gaza. You see the lady up there? And you see these pictures, these people being run into the emergency room, and they're pumping their chest and everything, and they're holding their cell phone in their hand. It's a miracle. TikTok addiction is bad everywhere, I guess. Here's another picture. This was to engender sympathy, this poor little boy. Now, do this. Okay, let's see. Thumb is number 1, index finger 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Somebody call L.A. Marzulli because I think we found one of the Nephilim. The world facing its worst economic crisis since 1938. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the people, the players that are involved. Of course, we have Iran, we have Israel, we have Haniya and I'm going to try to say Qatar. Everybody, it's so funny because people are like, you're not saying it right, John. You're not saying it right. Well, listen, guess what? I don't speak Arabic, okay? And you know what I'm talking about because you're telling me I'm pronouncing it wrong. And so the purpose of language, I said, tell this to my wife. She makes these comments. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, but you're saying wrong. But you know what I'm talking about. And the purpose of language is to communicate an idea. And I'm communicating the idea of what I'm talking about to you. And you understand that. So mission accomplished. Now, that's not, people don't like that. And people get pretty nasty. So Haniya in Gaza, Qatar. Of course, I'm watching all these people on internet. Qatar. And they had like whole videos when they had the World Cup there, like, how do you say it? And the guy says, I don't know. Then they ask an Arabian guy, and the Arabian guy says, he's from that country. And he says, this is the way we say it, but some people don't say it that way because if you don't speak Arabic, it's kind of a weird sound to make, the way you have to do your tongue and throat, and you don't do that. And if you're just trying to say our country, we love you for doing that. So they love me in whatever that country, however you say that country. So here's the, there's Hezbollah in Lebanon, Mahmoud Abbas in the Palestinian Authority, Bashar al-Assad in Syria, Erdogan in Turkey, and of course Putin up in Russia. So I have a little bit to say about each of them, and of course Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, and there are a bunch of others, but these are some of the main players on the stage right now. But understand, well, I'll get to Hania first. You understand he lives in Qatar. That's where he lives. He's the head of Hamas. It's a little bit of a ways away. So this is Erdogan. This is a picture of the Ottoman Empire at its fullest extent. You can see they controlled the areas down there along the Red Sea where Mecca and Medina are located. They were kicked out of there in the around World War I. They lost Israel, area of Israel, Jerusalem in 1917. The British Army under General Allenby, and they controlled a lot of the area. So that their country has shrunk back quite a bit from what it was. They even went into Eastern Europe, Bulgaria, and some of those places. So they controlled a lot of the Middle East, and that's significant. And Erdogan wants to do this. So Erdogan, but I want to see that at the heart of everything that these people say is a big fat lie. Now, I want to make sure I say that the right way. It's a really, really big fat lie about how they talk about Palestine, in scare quotes. So here's Erdogan. He's speaking at the Organization of Islamic Countries in 2017, and he puts up this graphic, and this is how they say it. Look at Palestine shrinking, and it's interesting that Palestine, right, is here. That was 1946, then 47, the UN partition plan, then 1948 to 1967, and then today, and it's the shrinking Palestine. And everybody uses this thing. But what's interesting kind of is the name that they give to Palestine in Turkish language. Philistin. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, because Turkish is not in my language repertoire either. English sometimes is. And my wife, don't pepper her with questions afterward, because she doesn't like to talk about it. So here's Erdogan at the UN a few years ago, using the same map, holding it up. And this is the guy, by the way, this is Hagia Sophia, the largest church in Christendom. And until the Ottoman Empire came on the scene in the 1500s, this church had stood there for 1,000 years. Huge church. But what did Erdogan do back in 2020? Well, it had been a museum, but what's he doing now? He's turning it into a mosque. It was a mosque for a while. And this was a picture. You can see they have are all appropriately masked and social distanced. And there's Erdogan in the middle. The first Muslim prayers in Hagia Sophia in 86 years. Turning it into a mosque. This is his thing when Trump wanted to move the embassy to Jerusalem. This is the map that one of Erdogan's newspapers put up. One of his mouthpiece newspapers. I don't know if he owns it. And it looks a lot like Ezekiel 38. Yeah, it has some people included in it that I don't think are included, but it's pretty good. And what's he doing? This is a video this morning in Turkey. Where are all those people going? They're going to protest at a U.S. base in Turkey, because U.S. supports Israel. They're as bad as Israel. Here's Mahmoud Abbas. Here he is at the UN, and he's using the same map. Look at how Palestine has shrunk. Here he is talking to a Palestinian group. He's using that map again. Here's our Secretary of State with him yesterday, shaking his hand. Here's the point. Well, I'll give you the point in just a moment. By the way, a few years ago, they opened a museum of the Palestinian people, the Palestinian Museum. But listen, look at what the headline says. It opened without artifacts, but it's still a beacon of hope. Oh, wait a minute. It didn't have Palestinian artifacts when they opened it? These are the headings. Symbolism in stone is what the article said. It's symbolic because we don't have any facts or things to back it up. I mean, you go to the British Museum and you'll see there's a good book out there, The Bible and the British Museum. If you ever go to the British Museum in London, there's tons of biblical stuff there. There's tons of Assyrian stuff there. Sennacherib cylinder talks about things in the Bible. The museum is more than its contents. Well, its contents are empty. And even the Trump plan sort of took off on these fake maps of Palestine. This is a Mennonite publication, the Mennonite Central Committee and Palestine and Israel. And here, what do? Palestine loss of land 1946 to 2014 when this was published. It's the same map. But what's wrong with it? Here's another website that I can't remember the name of this one. You can Google it. You can find it. It's a pro-Palestinian website. And so the light areas are Jewish areas. And they said, look at how this changed. Palestine was all this, and the Jews came in. But guess what? There was not a Palestine. That's the point. It's all fake. The whole thing is premised on a big fat lie. There was not a Palestine. The Palestinian Authority came into being in 1964. It was actually done with the instigation or assistance of the KGB because they wanted to cause chaos. They knew what they were doing. It sure worked, hasn't it? Here we are 60 years later. And I said, they want to say, we got to go back to the 67 line. So the blue area would be Israel and the brown area would be Palestine. And that's the 1967 border. Some people call those the Auschwitz lines because Israel wouldn't be able to defend itself. I say, don't do the 1916 borders, do the 967 BC borders, and you'll have a better representation. I would be on board with that. The 67 borders, 967 BC. And here's a map. This is laying on its side. This is a very well done map. It's done by some pro-Palestinian group to show things. But here's the point. Look at this. Arab population of Israel in 1967 was 390,000. In the West Bank at that time, Jewish, 0. Jewish population in the Gaza Strip, 0. Jewish population of East Jerusalem, 0. How's the genocide going? Well, when this thing started, back in the 60s, there were roughly 1.1 million Arabs in this area. Now there are over 5 million. Worst genocide in history in terms of failure. Worst failure at genocide in history. And here's a map. This is an interesting thing. So when the war started, Israel declares itself a nation, May 14th, 1948. And here's some of the populations in Muslim countries. So, for example, Egypt, 75,000. By 2005, there were 100 Jews in Egypt. Libya, 38,000 to 0. Morocco, 265,000 to 3,000. Syria, 30,000 to 100. Yemen, 55,000 to 200. Where were all the people demonstrating about the genocide of Jewish people in Arab countries and the relocation of Jewish populations, relocation of Jewish populations? Oh, well, they all left voluntarily. Well, then maybe the Palestinians left voluntarily in 1948. And you people, oh, by the way, I've been all over Israel. I've yet to see a Jewish refugee camp. I go into the Arab-controlled West Bank, and I see refugee camps. I go to Jordan, I see refugee camps. I don't go to Syria. There are refugee camps up there. And I'm not going to go into it. Go read Ezekiel chapter 35 and go read Obadiah, because I think this talks about the people who claim that they have a right to the land. These are prophecies I think are yet to be fulfilled. Here's a spoiler alert. It does not work out well for them. It's very similar to what it says in Joel. I bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and I judge them there. Why? Because they have divided my land. And I'm just telling you, without a Jewish state of Israel, that makes no sense, that passage in Joel. And I see Christians twisting themselves like pretzels that try to get around it. It's shocking. And people are pretty good. I agree with them on a lot of stuff, but not that one. And you can still be my friend, but I'm going to challenge you if I think you're being silly. So here's Netanyahu. Of course, he's a major player. I think he's not going to survive this. The day he came out and the U.S. wanted to have a ceasefire pause in Gaza, and people are saying, you can't do that. They're going to come after you, against you. Here's Tony Blinken speaking yesterday about this situation.
Even as we work toward progress on each of these urgent needs, we're focused on setting the conditions for a durable and sustainable peace and security. The United States continues to believe that the best viable path, indeed the only path, is through a two-state solution. That's the only guarantor of a secure Jewish and democratic Israel, the only guarantor of Palestinians realizing their legitimate right to live in a state of their own, enjoying equal measures of security, freedom, opportunity, and dignity. The only way to end a cycle of violence once and for all. And it's precisely now, in the darkest moments, that we have to fight hardest to preserve a path of stability, of security, of opportunity, of integration, of prosperity, and of peace. Not tomorrow, not after the war, but today.
So, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. They had a state in Gaza. How did that work out? Are you telling me you're going to go to anybody in Israel today and say, hey, well, except lunatics. I'm sure there are lunatics. There are lunatics everywhere. And you'll find them. You can find them all over Twitter. Pretty easy. I mean, my Twitter feed is just full of this garbage. I want to play a video. This is a video I found. And I'm going to turn the sound down here. Look at this destruction that you'll see. Look at the buildings destroyed. Whole neighborhoods just completely bombed to oblivion. Homes destroyed. People's lives uprooted. All these apartment buildings are destroyed. Now, in the context of talking about Gaza today and the destruction that's going on in Gaza, and it's horrific, a lot of people say, man, they really did a job on Gaza. But here's the problem. This video isn't of Gaza. This video is of Damascus. So my question again is, how many demonstrations worldwide have taken place to protest this? Probably 1 million people dead. How many demonstrations? Not many. and they'll blame somebody else. So Bashir Assad, he gets away with it. And here's Nasrallah. And there's this interesting video of Nasrallah. So before he goes to give his speech, he's giving a speech on Friday, November 3rd, never announced the location. He never appears, of course. He lives in a bunker. He lives underground. He very rarely comes up. He does have meetings with people. He met with the guys from Hamas, by the way, 3 weeks before the attack on October 7th. But we didn't have anything to do with it. It wasn't Iran. But it was Iran and Hezbollah at the meeting with the Hamas guys. We didn't have anything to do. We didn't even know about it. So here's a video they put up of, this was kind of, everybody's like trying to interpret the symbolism. Here's Nasrallah walking in front of the Hezbollah's sign, and then he goes and he's signing these papers. And this is before the speech. So a lot of people are saying, well, they're going to, and he has this special ring on. Looks a lot like Soleimani's ring. You can see he's taken his glasses off. He's given a lot of thought to this. So a lot of people thought that what he's going to do is he's going to declare war on Israel in his speech. And of course, there's Al-Quds, the Dome of the Rock, got a tear forming in his eye, going over his speech. And you think I'm long, this guy, he's always an hour and a half. And he doesn't use PowerPoint very often. So here's another one. This is people getting ready to listen to him. Big crowds in southern Lebanon where he's, the video screen was put up where he's speaking. Here's a picture of him. So he does this speech. Now, some of the people leading up, Hezbollah has had a lot of losses. About 20%, 25% of the people killed in this 2006 Lebanon war, which lasted 37 days, have already been killed, even though the war really hasn't started in the north. And here's Hezbollah, or Assad, or Nasrallah giving a speech. And he said that Israeli civilians in Gaza border communities were killed on October 7th by Israeli forces who were acting insanely as they were caught by surprise and were drunk, not by Hamas. That's what he actually said. And so that's what I'm saying is when you're passing this on that Israel planned this and Israel did this, it's not Hezbollah is going to pick up of it and they're going to say this is the fact. Look at these people out here saying this. That's my concern about it. Okay? And so maybe that's what turns out to be the case. But there's a big investigation that has to take place first. That's my concern. So he said this blessed and broad operation was decided and implemented by Palestinians, and its owners hid it from everyone, even from the resistance factions in Gaza. The decision made by the resistant movements is made by the leaders of the resistant movements, and what happened in the past and in the Al-Aqsa flood confirms this fact. It has no relation to it, or it has no relation at all to any intentional or regional issues. We didn't know about it. It took us by surprise too. Now he goes on and says, well, Israel's got a third of its army up here. They've evacuated 43 communities, maybe, 100,000 people. And those people don't know when they're going back. And they're trying to, and then they're now, he didn't really declare war. He said, we're not going to do this. Here's some key points on his speech. Let's see. He goes, Hezbollah has entered the war. The intensity depends on Israeli behavior toward Lebanon and how the situation develops in Gaza. In case of a regional war, U.S. ships and the Air Force will pay a heavy price. We have ships out there in the Mediterranean. Preparations have been made to destroy all U.S. naval assets. The Al-Aqsa operation was an independent decision by Palestinians. If Israel bombs our civilians, we will bomb their civilians. How they act will determine how we will act. Yemen and Iraqi forces will intensify their attacks on U.S. and Israeli assets. The U.S. should remember its humiliating defeats in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. So, again, he reiterated that Israel killed its own citizens, wildly cheering crowds. Palestinians were upset. They didn't think he went far enough. He should have declared war. He did not do that. I don't trust him. I'm like, I don't believe anything he said. They may expand the war. I don't know yet. Here's the problem, though. And he said in the speech, all options are on the table. So that doesn't sound like he's shying away from war. He's just saying, we'll decide when we want to do it. And here is a look at the dividing line. So this is from the Times UK, and this is pretty much true in the US. Like Republicans support about 67%, and independents is about 17% supporting Israel, and Democrats is nobody really supporting Israel. And among young people, college age and a little bit older, above 50% think Hamas is doing just fine. They support Hamas. Protests all over the world. Putin, he's got involved. His ambassador at the UN essentially said, listen, Israel doesn't really have a right to defend itself in this situation. In Dagestan, in Russia, a mob, it's a Muslim part of Russia. And believe me, Russia has a Muslim problem. They stormed an airport. They they tried to get on an airplane that they heard came from Tel Aviv when they were demanding to see passports to determine whether the people were Jewish. They were even looking in the airplane engine for them. Somebody, But listen, I've often said this for, 25 years at least. If Russia is a part of this Ezekiel 38, 39, maybe one of the hooks in the jaw is they want to get the Muslim problem off their backs for a while. So what would get the Muslim problem off their backs? Look at the map that Erdogan put up. We'll go attack Israel. We'll help you attack Israel if you leave us alone for a while. Now, Hamas, Wagner is supposed to be giving this Panzer anti-aircraft, anti-missile thing to Hezbollah that's coming from Syria. Seth Franzman has a pretty good article on this in the Jerusalem Post today. The Panzer, it's good, but it's not that great. It's not that great at shooting things down. Iran's getting involved in a lot of things. Here's one of the heads of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard says that Israel is like a dagger plunged into the body of the Islamic world. Here's some headlines from the Tehran Times. Prime Minister, that's Netanyahu, is finished. He's called that in Israel. This is maps from China, by the way, an ally of Iran. Russia's an ally of Iran. But here's maps in China on Alibaba's website. What did they do? They took Israel off the map. It's not there. Palestinian territories are there, but Israel's gone. And Iran's trying to, they don't know, what are we going to do? Do we send our troops in, or because they're just using proxies. They never go in. Here is a meeting. This is in Qatar with the Iranian foreign minister and the head of that country. Oil rich, 400,000. Everybody gets a couple million a year. And now the question, this is a good article at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. There should be a link to this article in the notes that accompany the video on YouTube. And it says the ultimate goal of the war, a new regional and global architecture. So these are intelligent guys, and they say the Gaza war should serve to upend the existing order and usher in a new regional order. The transformation will be reflected in a new regional framework that relies on the normalization process between Israel and the Arab world, spearheaded by Saudi Arabia. In other words, they think we're going to go back to this the way it was. And I think that this is going to be the case when Israel wins the war. If they win it decisively, the Saudis will respect the strong horse. Dr. Mordecai Kedar, he got a longer segment than I did, but that's okay. He could have had my time, frankly. I would have listened to him. On Alex Newman a week ago. Excellent guy. Go look him up on the internet. Mordecai Kedar, Kedar. Very intelligent guy. And so they're saying that they're going to go back to this framework. And I think that that's probably going to be a case. The state of Israel should not settle for merely destroying Hamas, but rather needs to adopt absolute security responsibility in the Gaza Strip for many years. Only in this way will it be possible to restore civilian trust in the IDF and enable the renewed flourishing of the communities in the Western Negev. And that's right. The new regional order also necessitates a departure from contemporary paradigms, including that of the need to support the Palestinian Authority without it undergoing a fundamental change. The war in Gaza highlights the weakness and irrelevance of the Palestinian Authority. Talk of it resuming control of Gaza is divorced from reality. Due to its weaknesses, corruption, and illegitimacy, the Palestinian Authority is incapable of governing the Strip. And there's concern that Hamas has majority support within the area of the West Bank. I mean, you go around the West Bank and talk to people, they'll tell you, if you ask them nicely, that they support Hamas. They hate Abu Mazen. And Mordecai Kadar has a theory, I think it's very well stated, that their culture is very tribal. And so Mahmoud Abbas is from a different tribe, and so they don't like him if they're not part of that tribe. That's why, so he proposes something like the United Arab Emirates to get them governed. And here's an article in Jerusalem Post. I don't have time to go into it. It's in Friday's Jerusalem Post. What will victory in Gaza mean for Israel? This is the former head of the Mossad, Yossi Cohen. And he says, listen, we don't need to just go Gaza. We need to go after the Iranians that planned this. And he knows what's going on. The academics thing in this country is out of control with the support for Hamas. Law schools have said, listen, you shouldn't do this. They're taking a stand. 24 giant law firms in the United States have said, they've even gone to people that they've made offers to and withdrawn the offer. You support Hamas, you're not coming to work for us because you've proved that you really aren't a very good thinker. That's how they would do it. This editorial in the Wall Street Journal the other day, the two countries are working together against U.S. allies and interests. And who is that? The Iran-Russia military axis. There's also these pictures. They're attacking ambulances. But you can see videos from prior years, 2014, and when there were these dust-ups with Hamas in Gaza, they use ambulances to get around. So they shoot an ambulance, and, it's just terrible what they did. This is The Economist. The pace of Israel's war in Gaza far exceeds previous conflicts. This is not like anything that we've seen before. Now, here's Barry Weiss and Walter Russell Mead, and this is kind of where I got my title today, and I want to play a couple minutes of this, and I got to find it. Hang on. No, excuse me a second. I have to do this. This is old school. This is audio only. So here's Walter Russell Mead. Okay, this is going to jump in the middle of it, but I think you'll get the point here pretty quickly.
Judy was boring.
Hello.
Then Judy discovered ChumbaCasino.com.
It's my little escape.
There.
Now Judy's the life of the party.
Oh, baby, mama's bringing home the bacon.
Whoa, take it easy, Judy. The Chumba life is for everybody.
And an era of permanent calm. It was the eye of the storm. And we are now going, it looks to me like the eye is passing over and we're about to get hit with the backside of the storm.
Every time we talk, I'm just so compelled by what you have to say. And I go back to what you were saying earlier in this conversation about how we need Biden to have these fireside chats, and we need sort of the energy and the focus and the duty of all of these different aspects of American private sector, American citizens pushing in the same direction toward a broader goal that is so much bigger than any one of us. And then I look to President Biden, or I look to former President Trump. And frankly, I look to the halls of the Senate and Congress, at least most of them, and think, oh my God, who could possibly be the leader that could do that kind of work? Because I just don't see that capacity in our current president. Like, is this moment going to also sort of usher in a new set of American leaders with a very different understanding of our place in the world? Or who do you look to for a bright spot, I guess? Help me with my pessimism about the current slate of leaders who you could say have brought us to this pass, and I don't necessarily think are the ones to get us out of it.
Well, I will say, even though I'm one of them myself, I think the baby boom generation has been a disaster in terms of American foreign policy, American educational policy, the direction of American society, and it really is time for a change. We do need a new generation of leaders with new perspectives. Now, that said, the thing that worries me most is, guess who educated these younger generations? The boomers. In that sense, we have not done our part. You look at the state of American universities, we were talking about that a little bit at the start of the conversation. The intellectual leadership that should have been making our universities beacons of hope, freedom, innovation. On the science side, we're not doing that bad of a job, but anything having to do with the humanities, social sciences, we seem to have utterly lost our way. So I do worry that we've got a new generation coming along that's going to have to punch through a lot of illusions, false teaching, bad ideas, and ultimately find their way to solid ground. That's what's going to have to happen. I think it will, because it has to.
One of the things that has happened since the massacre of October 7th is, I don't even know the right word, explosion seems too weak, an orgy of anti-Semitic assaults, harassment, and violence all over the world. From Dagestan to Montauk, New York, to Cornell University.
Judy was boring.
So she's right. In one of the other parts of the discussion that they had, you can go to get her podcast, Barry Weiss, Honestly. And near the end, about an hour or 5 minutes into it, they talk about we're going through this period of massive, humongous change. And listen to what Barry says. We need leadership. We need someone to come in and talk to us and have a fireside chat with us and lead us through this terrible time. And she's not a lunatic. But what does that sound like the world is being set up for? Now, when I talk about this, people say, oh, well, you want to bring Armageddon. You want all this. No, I don't. I'm just reading the book. I'm just telling you what's coming. My eschatology, I don't cause it to happen. Around my house, I get to control my golf clubs and the lawnmower and my computer. Okay, I don't have an army. And that's not a slam at my wife. She does a fantastic job at all the other stuff, praise the Lord. But Christians don't have armies. But the Muslims, they believe, I shouldn't recommend them, but Glenn Beck put up something yesterday about Iran. I thought it was pretty good. And the Mahdi and all the stuff, and they're saying the Mahdi coming is close. But they believe that they can cause chaos on the world, and that will bring the Mahdi in. They can bring in the end times. I don't believe their eschatology is true. I believe that they think it's true. There's a difference. That's pretty big difference. And they can cause the end times by chaos and bringing about an Armageddon type scenario. So all these little Twitter fanatics run around, oh, you Christians, you want Armageddon. I want Jesus to come back and fix it. You want somebody to fix it? Who do you think? Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Donald Trump? Anybody on the world scene yet? But they're clamoring for it. That's the point. And so Meade goes through and he says, we're going through this massive, humongous change. We had the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution changed the way families were organized. It became, instead of an extended kin clan taking care of families, it became a nuclear family. Now we're going through a thing where they don't even want to have children. And birth rates are dropping, collapsing all over the place. And what does the future look like when there are no people to populate it? But at the same time, we're going through this, and I'm going to go over a few minutes because I just want to talk about something. I will cover it more in a midweek if I have time to do a midweek this week. But it's a big deal because there's another industrial revolution going on, and that's AI. Elon Musk's company, he said, we're coming out with our large language model, and it's going to change the field. It's called XAI. And that was supposed to launch yesterday. This week he went there. Just a couple things before I get to Elon. Good article I want to recommend. Again, the link is in the notes under the YouTube description. Jonathan Spire published at Middle East Forum, where Jonathan Spire is one of their lead analysts, if not their lead analyst. Published yesterday, The Australian in Australia. Clock ticks for Israel on hostages, Hamas, and diplomatic grace. What he said is Israel has all of these competing interests. They got to get in there and do something. They got to do it, but the soldiers were he went down and saw them at the base where I was in December. They were being trained on how to go in there. And then they're going in. Now, I don't know how many have been killed. I hear that the number of dead IDF is about 400 so far, but that includes the 300 or so killed on October 7th. So I don't know how many have been killed in these operations. I haven't been getting what I consider to be verifiable information on that. I know people have been, their funerals being held, so I know that there have been IDF soldiers killed. But he said, look, they just had to be trained and then they were going in. But yet the U.S. saying, oh, you guys need to pause, you can't do this. Got to prepare the ground. It's very difficult. Some of these tunnels, Russia Today did a thing where the guy went down in the tunnels and they're like 230 feet deep, some of these. And they're narrow. They're only, like I said, I was going to go through one in the mock-up that they have of Gaza City, and I sort of measured my shoulder width and the width of the tunnel and the width of me if I turn sideways. Okay, I know you're thinking that. And I wasn't getting through. So I said, I'm gonna go back out. You skinny guys can go through. But they're going in with backpacks, body armor, helmets, and all this other stuff. And they can only go through single file in a lot of these tunnels. So this is a difficult operation. Pray for people's safety. Pray for the innocent people of Gaza too, that they'll be allowed to leave. It's a difficult problem. Amir Avivi, again, there's a link in the notes. He's head of the Israeli Defense and Security Forum. Wrote a great article thinking through this. It's not that long. You can read it in a few minutes. Published this week, the day after Hamas, we need to start planning. What's going to happen? And he's thinking about this. What does victory look like, and how do we manage it when we get there? And he says there's 3 conditions. We have to take over the border. Israel must ensure that it has freedom to operate in Gaza in order to destroy terror infrastructures. And then there's a third thing, and I'm not seeing here. You can go read the thing again, the link is in the notes in the YouTube description. I'm going to have a mercy thing here.
If there's any chance of us being able to act constructively to do something, it will require an admission of complexity and maintaining what on the surface may seem contradictory ideas. That what Hamas did was horrific and there's no justification for it. And what is also true is that the occupation and what's happening to Palestinians is unbearable. And what is also true is that there is a history.
Okay, you don't want to listen to anymore of that, right? But does it sound like he really went away? Honestly? That's why I call it the Biden administration. I rest my case. Here's, boy, just horrific things. This is an example of, so this was an Israeli airstrike blew up a ambulance. Now, folks, let's think about it a little bit. What do you see under the ambulance? A horse cart, right? Is it possible the ambulance hit a horse cart? There's so much propaganda. This is outside the White House last night. They're climbing the fence, beating on the fence, trying to get over the fence into the White House. How many of them do you think are being prosecuted for that? This is the protest in D.C. on the mall. On the left is Berlin. Pro-Palestinian, anti-Jew things. They're putting Jewish stars on homes and businesses all across Europe where Jewish people live or work. And it's happening here in the United States. But on the right, that's Washington, D.C. And again, this is part of what they've been trained that Walter Russell Mead was talking about in his interview with Barry Weiss. We've trained these people to think about identity, and now they're completely blind. They can't even see the evil that's happening. Here's a picture of the D.C. protest. That was one of the people at the D.C. protest. Now, on that date in January of 2021, were those, I don't know if those symbols were there. But the whole FBI runs around saying that you're all a bunch of that. And it's just a big fat lie. You know, Christopher Wray worked for a law firm, and he's the FBI director. You know how much he was making at that law firm? $15 million a year. You've heard him testify. Do you think it's because he's so smart? No, it's because he knows how to wield power. That's how he gets paid that much. And so here, this is Charing Cross train station. I was in there in UK there a few years ago. Big train station full of pro-Palestinian demonstrators. This is truth is the latest casualty in a vicious propaganda war, and it's unlike anything I've ever seen. But here's the thing is, this is the intersection that's taking place. You have these identity politics, and Walter Russell Mead said, man, the Industrial Revolution was pretty rough. And 100 years ago, we were in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. Now we're in one that's unlike any that we've had, and the Middle East is melting down. And AI is coming. And so here's what Musk said, I don't think you'll have to work with AI coming. Well, what are all these people out marching around going to do? Look at this.
I think AI is one of the biggest threats. I mean, we are, for the first time, we have a situation where there's something that is going to be far smarter than the smartest human. So, you know, we're not stronger or faster than other creatures, but we are more intelligent. And
not all of them.
And here we are for the first time, really, in human history, with something that's going to be far more intelligent than us. So it's not clear to me we can actually control such a thing, but I think we can aspire to guide it in a direction that's beneficial to humanity. But I do think it's one of the existential risks that we face, and it's potentially the most pressing one. But if you look at the time scale and the rate of advancement, I think the summit is timely, and I applaud the Prime Minister for holding it.
That was in the UK this week. In London, where they're having all the pro-Palestinian things. So I'm just saying and he said, jobs for the bots people. Half people fear that AI is going to replace them. And Elon said, well, you won't have to work. You'll have a high basic income that will provide you. I'm just saying this is on an epic scale. And Biden came out with an executive order this week, and I'll talk more about that in the future. But because it's a big problem, we all acknowledge it's a big problem. But thank goodness Joe Biden is on top of it. I mean, I'm going to go home and take a nap this afternoon. I may go sleep just because I don't want to think about what's going on. Anyway, a lot of stuff. But do you see how all this is related to Bible prophecy, Middle East centric, and another industrial revolution type thing going on, and culture, and it's what did I title this thing? Massive, humongous change. But we know how it works out. But it can be bumpy till we get there. So let's pray. Lord, thanks for your word. Thanks for the time, the blessing that you gave us to tell us about some of these things in advance. And so, Lord, I just pray you'll help us to get ourselves organized in faith communities, support one another, speak the truth in love, but give us an extra measure of the Holy Spirit so we can deal with the very complex, difficult issues that we have in this day. And not that we have a spirit of fear, but one of power, and that you'll give us opportunities to share the gospel with those, because it does appear the time is getting short. And the eternal destiny of a lot of people is going to be fixed in the near future. Bless us this week. Give us those opportunities. In Jesus' name, amen.